Minister, my question specifically relates to Israel's presence and settlements in the occupied Palestine in the West Bank. And I'm asking what you're going to do about the advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice, which states that member states, including Ireland obviously, are under a positive obligation to abstain from entering into treaty relations with Israel in all cases in which it purports to act on behalf of the occupied Palestinian territory, etc., and to abstain from entering economic or trade. It set out the question. I would ask you to deal with that specifically in relation to the bill that's waiting to be passed through the Dáil, the Occupied Territories Bill.
Thank you.
On July the 19th, 2024, the International Court of Justice delivered an advisory opinion on the legal consequences arising from the policies and practices of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. You recall that the Attorney General on behalf of the government made a submission to the court in respect of this. In its advisory opinion, the court concluded that Israel's continued presence in the occupied Palestinian territory is unlawful, and that Israel is under an obligation to bring its unlawful presence there to an end as rapidly as possible. I issued a statement immediately following the delivery of the court's opinion, indicating that I would be engaging with partners, including within the EU, with a view to ending Israel's unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory and bringing about the full realisation of the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. Ireland subsequently co-sponsored a resolution adopted by the General Assembly on the 18th of September 2024, which seeks to implement the Court's advisory opinion. The resolution elaborates on the obligations arising for Israel, for all states, and for international organisations arising from Israel's unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory, including in the field of trade. For Ireland and all EU member states, international trade falls within the exclusive competence of the Union, and as such Ireland acts through the EU in relation to the conclusion of agreements relating to international trades in goods and services. Trade relations between the EU and its member states and Israel are governed by the EU-Israel Association Agreement. The EU-Israel Association Agreement expressly provides that it applies to the territory of the State of Israel only. This necessarily excludes the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. Discussions within the European Union on the implications for the Union's policies and practices vis-à-vis Israel and the OPT have now begun. In these discussions, Ireland has pressed its clear view that the continuation of trade between the EU and Israeli settlements in the OPT helps to sustain those settlements and therefore amounts to aid and assistance in the maintenance of the illegal situation there, entrenching it and making it economically more viable. The ICJ Advisory Opinion has made it clear that all states must abstain from entering into economic or trade dealings with Israel concerning the OPT that may entrench its unlawful presence there. And in these discussions in Brussels, the government has called for EU steps to take to prohibit that trade. In the context of the Occupied Territories Bill, a further opinion has been asked from the Attorney General, and I do believe that this ICJ Advisory Opinion changes the situation. I'll await the AG's advice. I've already taken some actions in relation to it, and I believe it's a new context that, in my view, places obligations on member states to follow the recommendations of the court.
Well, I welcome that you're saying that has changed the situation. I'd like you maybe to outline how that has changed for Ireland. What concretely does that mean? 500 people have lost their lives in less than a year in the West Bank, a war that continues without any recognition, really. And now we have this advisory opinion telling us we're all under an obligation. Now, I'm going to repeat, I'm not given to propaganda or exaggeration, but I'm actually in despair at what's happening in Gaza, as a lot of other people are. And in relation to that, yes, you have very strong words, but unfortunately the action is not following. And one of the concrete ways to do that is to enact the Occupied Territories Bill. And I'm glad you're going back to get further advice. 500 people are now dead in 1 year alone there. And so if that was enacted before, we didn't do that. And Senator Black brought in that bill in 2018 or 19, and it has never been enacted. And I have no idea now, Taoiseach, why you're still reluctant to go with that bill.
First of all, bill or no bill, that wouldn't stop Israel from what it's doing, unfortunately. And what it's doing in West Bank in the West Bank is reprehensible. And I just really do take issue with this latest sort of propaganda that it's just words and not action. Don't accept that, and I will not accept it, and I will consistently rebut that argument, because Ireland has taken action and will continue to take action on all levels. And in terms of the bill itself, it seeks to restrict the import and sale of goods and to provision of service originating from settlements in relevant occupied territories. As we said, I think the ICJ Advisory Opinion, in my view, gives a new context to this. And I haven't the AG's opinion yet, but we will be getting it very, very shortly. And the previously, it was concluded in terms of legal advice that the bill was contrary to EU law and that certain provisions are unconstitutional and so forth, because of the common commercial policy under EU law is an exclusive EU competence. However, I do genuinely believe that the ICJ's advisory opinion, in our view, places obligations on states now not to in any way, shape or form support the occupation. But again, we will come back to the House as soon as we have that opinion from the Attorney General.
Thank you, Taoiseach. I welcome that. However, we were always under an obligation under the Genocide Convention, and we were always under an obligation in relation to the trade with Israel in relation to human rights, and we could have taken action, and we can take an action. In relation to the Occupied Territories Bill, we have leading experts in law telling us that two of the world's leading experts, and I'll read it out to you if I have the time, fully entitled to pass the Occupied Territories Bill. The legal opinion by Professor Tridimas, a leading EU law specialist who has served as an advisor to the European Commission, European Parliament. Professor Koutra, and I apologise for the pronunciation, Koutrakos, three-time European Commission, Jean Monnet chair in EU law, and so on. And an ordinary person on the street would know that you can't trade with a country that's committing genocide. An ordinary person knows that at some stage that trade has to cease one way or another if we're to give meaning to our words. And I repeat, you have given and said very strong words without action. We have recognised Palestine. There will be no Palestine to recognise if we let the genocide continue. I'll stop on time.